Hey everyone, I hope you guys enjoyed my behind the scenes look at Dragon Quest II last week, told through developer interviews from way back in the day. Today I'm here to share with you a behind the scenes look at how the original Dragon Quest came to be back on the Famicom. This time told through a new medium, the medium of manga. This is an interesting manga that starts off by telling the tale of how the creators first met, what their kind of inspirations were, and how the game came to be. If you are interested in Dragon Quest videos, top 10 videos, reviews, and podcasts, please remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications to all so you don't miss the next video. If you really like this and you're on mobile, be sure to click that hype button. It helps out so much with exposure. Let's get into the Dragon Quest origin manga known in Japan as Dragon Quest Enomichi. So the manga actually opens up by introducing the main characters. We've got, of course, Yuji Horii. We've got Koichi Nakamura, who was the main programmer of the original Dragon Quest. We've got Koichi Sugiyama. Interestingly enough, I did not know that he was a well-known game collector. It says here that he was back in the day. And then we've got, of course, Akira Toriyama. And because this manga is illustrated by Hiroyuki Taizawa, you actually get a portrait of Akira Toriyama instead of his self-portrait, which is that little robotic-looking dude. And of course, we got lesser-known Yukinobu Chida, Enix's managing director, who kind of brought these guys all together with a contest. That's right, when video games were popping off in Japan, Enix put out this contest with a 3 million yen grand prize to draw in aspiring video game developers and programmers. This contest was actually how Yuji Horii and Nakamura got the confidence to kind of like make their own games and kind of brought them together. Yuji Horii wanted to tell his story through the medium of video games, and Koichi Nakamura wanted to show his programming prowess. So he invited a friend over to show him the new game that he created, and his friend was quite impressed, which is kind of what gave him the confidence to enter this contest. So he immediately began work on what he declared as an even better game to put into Enix's contest. Meanwhile, Yuji Horii was actually working for the company that owns Shonen Jump, and he was told to cover this contest. When told to cover the contest, he already knew all about it, because he was excited to enter it himself. Of course, he didn't tell his boss this. He wanted his boss to think he was focused on work, when in reality, he was an aspiring game creator himself. He really wanted to tell a story through the medium of gaming. Up until now, he had only been trying to tell stories through the medium of manga. By the time December came around, Koichi Nakamura had finished his game Door Door and was ready to enter it in Enix's competition. Nakamura, however, was conflicted. He didn't know if he should stick to his studies and get like a normal career, or if he should focus on his talents as a programmer. I don't know how true this is, but he did a coin flip, and because of the way the coin landed, he decided, you know what? If I don't place in the top 3, I'll go back to school, study another year in college. But if I place in the top 3 of Enix's competition, that is a sign from the universe that I belong here as a programmer. As they announced some of the winners from the Enix tournament, neither Koichi Nakamura nor Yuji Horii actually win the grand prize, but Koichi Nakamura wins the Excellent Program Award with his game Door Door, and Yuji Horii wins the Selected Works title for his game Love Match Tennis. Enix producer Yukinobu Chida then congratulates all of the award winners and says how impressed Enix was by the high quality of the submissions to the contest. He also tells the award winners that he really hopes that these developers will push themselves and make even better games moving forward, as he can't wait to see what they achieve. It's kind of funny because Yuji Horii's Love Match Tennis won as a selected work, and he was also hired by his job to cover this event. So it was kind of ironic that somebody who was supposed to be covering it for the media, his game actually won as one of the selected works, and he was pretty proud of his accomplishment. Nakamura, on the other hand, was pretty upset. He actually wanted the grand prize, so he was kind of disappointed in his placement in the competition. And because he didn't win the grand prize, even though he said if he would place top 3, he did want to go back to school and get some kind of a degree, just in case he couldn't make it as a programmer. Later on in February of 1983, Enix releases the contest winners as commercial games. And after doing so, they find out that 3 of their contest winners actually take the top 3 spots in sales. With his newfound career in game development, Yuji Horii releases the Portopia Serial Murder Case for PC in September of 1983. The game goes on to sell over 60,000 copies, which is huge for an adventure game at the time. Because of this, Enix decides that the future of gaming is going to revolve more around adventure games than just sports, puzzles, and platforming. PC games were moving away from action and towards more cerebral ones, like adventure games, and games like Yuji Horii's Portopia serial murder case. So he decides to recruit Koichi Nakamura and Yuji Horii once more for some new games. So while Koichi Nakamura was working on his second game for Enix, Neutron, they all decided to take a trip together to the United States to see firsthand what the future of PC gaming would look like. Little did they know that this trip to San Francisco would be what inspired them to create Dragon Quest. They all flew out to the Apple Fest computer trade show, where they ended up coming across this brand new computer RPG called Wizardry. This game would go on to be a massive hit in Japan, and when they got their hands on it, they wanted to make a similar game themselves. After experiencing it at the trade show, it was all Yuji Horii and Nakamura could talk and think about for the rest of the trip. Nakamura even proclaimed, "Horii, someday we'll make a game even better than Wizardry." In January of 1984, Yuji Horii bought himself an Apple computer and dove headfirst into Wizardry to get a feel for the game and what he could do to improve upon it. Around that time, the Nintendo Famicom or Family Computer was released, and it was doing incredibly well despite heavy competition. It was selling out everywhere. For a home console, it actually had superior performance over what PC games could do at the time. Because of this, Enix decided to shift their focus towards the Famicom console and decided to port Nakamura's Door game to the Famicom, where it sold over 300,000 copies. This was the start towards Enix's shift to the Nintendo Famicom. Nakamura and Cheetah had noticed it was the golden age of the action game. Nintendo was working on Mario Brothers, and they knew it was going to be a massive success. This really was the time for platformers to shine on home console. It was at this time that Nakamura was coming up with a ton of different game ideas to be released on the Famicom. Most of them were all action and shooting games because that's what was popular at the time. Cheetah, however, said that his and Enix's idea moving forward was to make an RPG on the Famicom. Nakamura had been playing Wizardry non-stop since last October and was excited to hear this news. RPGs hadn't really made their way to the Famicom, but were very popular on PCs. And the problem here was that at the time, RPGs needed text input in order to play the games. This would be absolutely impossible on the Famicom that only had a D-pad, start, select, and 2 face buttons. They decided to kind of shelve the idea until they could come up with a way to play an RPG with a Famicom controller. Thankfully, Yuji Horii had an idea on how to do this already. He implemented this in his port of the Portopia serial murder case. You see, instead of having to type out your decisions, he used something that he calls to this day the command system, where there are a number of different command prompts on screen, and you could just use the D-pad to select which command prompt you'd like to use. So from the command menu, you could select search, or you could open. And because of Yuji Horii's command menu, they knew that someday soon, an RPG would be possible on Nintendo's Famicom. In November of 1985, Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura successfully ported the Portopia serial murder case on the Nintendo Famicom, which sold over 700,000 copies, showing that the command menu was an absolute success. This sealed the deal for Cheetah that an RPG had to be next on the Famicom, and that they were the ones that were going to do it. Unfortunately, other people at Enix were not as confident in this. They thought it was absolutely impossible to do an RPG on a home console, but Cheetah knew better. Everyone just wanted a Portopia sequel, but Cheetah, Yuji Horii, and Nakamura all knew what they were capable of and what they had to do next. Because of the success of Portopia, Enix and Cheetah were actually reached out to by the composer Koichi Sugiyama, who had been composing a wide range of music for TV and anime. This was a huge deal because back then, games didn't have the greatest soundtracks. The soundtrack was just an afterthought or didn't even exist in some games. Turns out, Koichi Sugiyama was a huge video game fan, and had been playing the crap out of not just Portopia, but games like Donkey Kong, Super Mario Brothers, Lode Runner, and he even bought a PC to play more games. Cheetah asked if Sugiyama would be interested in working with Enix on their next game, to which Sugiyama had presumed would be Portopia 2, but Cheetah told him they were wanting to work on an RPG. Sugiyama agreed that this would be a massive undertaking, but was completely on board when he heard what Cheetah and Enix were wanting to make. He said there are 2 types of people in this world. There are those who will do what they want no matter what. They are, in other words, almost childlike. Then there's another type, the so-called grown-ups. Those who are unable to do what they want as they worry what others will think of them. Cheetah gasped and thought, "You think I'm a child?" And Sugiyama said, "Yeah, but I like those types better because I'm just a big kid too." and you can't make decent games without that kind of a mindset. Cheetah agreed, and they both looked forward to working with each other in the near future. In December of 1985, Yuji Horii's ties to the Shonen Jump magazine led him and his editor to introduce renowned manga writer and animator Akira Toriyama to their friend and programmer Koichi Nakamura. With this absolute dream team all together in one room, it was time for Cheetah to announce that they would now be officially working on a role-playing game for the Famicom. This was going to be a massive gamble, but if anyone could pull it off, it would be scenario writer Yuji Horii, programmer Koichi Nakamura, and artist and monster designer Akira Toriyama. He also let them know that for the music, they'd be bringing in famed composer Koichi Sugiyama, and that Cheetah had one vision: to make the greatest game in the world, a spectacular game that'll inspire and excite children around the globe. They set out to make the greatest game the world had ever seen. Yuji Horii then set off to come up with ideas for the scenario of this brand new RPG. He thought about how RPGs are games where you have to fight enemies thousands of times, and he needed a scenario that wasn't boring. He needed something that had a humorous and warm setting, a fantasy setting maybe, or maybe set in space or a futuristic world. Science fiction didn't sound too bad, but as he took in his surroundings, he noticed the aroma of the sea and the grass mixing together, the warmth from the sun, the blue skies, the fields, the rocky mountains, and potential caves nearby. He also thought of the possibility of an endless desert, and finally, a vast ocean or sea. A world with towns bustling with people, and then a monster appears. It could take place in medieval Europe, a swords and sorcery fantasy world. Maybe a demon king could kidnap the princess and plot to destroy the world, and a young hero could rise up and fight the demon king to save the princess. But wait a minute, there were plenty of other games where it all ends after saving the princess. Yuji Horii wanted to make a story where the adventure continues even after saving her. After that, the climax could be the decisive battle with the demon king. The problem is, how simple will it have to be? Role-playing games are the type of game where the player gets stronger as they continue, but how will they make it more interesting even at the beginning? If they don't make it easy to understand, nobody will want to play it. The final goal is the Demon King, to defeat the Dragon King. The game world needed to be easy to grasp right from the beginning. Yuji Horii told the rest of the team his thoughts of it being some kind of a dreamy fantasy world where you'll have to fight enemies constantly. Cheetah suggested that he didn't want it to have a brutal feeling. He would prefer something more warm and lighthearted. He didn't want players to get sick of it or they wouldn't be able to finish it. So Yuji Horii said he thinks that's why the enemies should be fantasy creatures that should look unique but not scary. An adventure where you're excited to run into monsters. Cheetah said that that was a great idea and that Toriyama would be absolutely up to the task. Yuji Horii also then showed off the world map, full of oceans, forests, vast fields, and towns full of people. This part of the design process was what hits me the most, because when I was a little kid, this is exactly what got me into the game. I wasn't old enough to really read or figure out what was going on in the game. It was literally the excitement of being able to see these cool new monsters that made me want to continue playing Dragon Warrior on the NES and explore this vast, new, exciting world. The monster designs were what kept me involved in the game that I didn't even really know how to play. All I knew was that if I kept fighting monsters, it would make a noise and the monsters would get easier. So the more I could fight monsters, the easier it would get, and the more monsters and more of the world I could see. It absolutely blows my mind that these are the ideas that were going through Yuji Horii's head. These exact ideas that captivated me the first time playing it as a young child. They then went on to think about what the battles should look like. Yuji Horii figured instead of an action system, he wanted to implement that command menu system for the battles. He wanted kids to be able to read the action and use their imagination as to what was actually happening. They then need to come up with ideas of how this would look visually. Originally, they were going to make the game look more like Ultima, and then I thought, what if the battles looked more intense like Wizardry, and exploring the world was based more around the look of Ultima? But they needed an original touch, a multi-window system. At the time, windows were commonly used for business on PC, but by displaying multiple windows on the screen, complex information could be displayed in an orderly and easy to understand manner. That way they could use the whole screen for the map, while also tracking their stats like level, hit points, magic points, and gold. Initially, they thought that this might be too much information on the screen, but it was actually Cheetah who suggested that the level stat is absolutely necessary. Up until now, role-playing games were always played on a PC, where it was just you in your room alone. But because the Famicom was in living rooms everywhere, they wanted other people in the room to be able to see what level the player was, so even people not playing the game could notice the progression. Cheetah also wanted the feeling of leveling up being something that the player always wanted to come back to. It would make the player push on even in times of difficulty if he could hear that jingle and see his stats increasing right in front of him. Even if that level stat wasn't important to the player, it would become important to the players around. They knew if they wanted to get to this difficult area, this was kind of the bare minimum their level had to be in order to succeed there. Then they needed a name. Yuji Horii himself came up with the name Dragon Quest. Because the game was based on a journey to find the Dragon Lord, everyone thought Dragon Quest was the absolute perfect name for this game. Next, they had to figure out design based on the limitations of the Famicom. They realized that they could get the screen to scroll in 4 different directions, but had to come up with some sort of password save system. They decided to call the password the Incantation of Resurrection to make it fit the world of Dragon Quest more, instead of just being a password. They needed to figure out the perfect length, however, because you didn't want it to be too long or it would be impossible to write down and keep track of, but it also couldn't be too short in order to account for weapons, armor, items, the character's level and experience, as well as other information. After thinking on it, they realized they could have a max of 8 items and 15 different types of those items. They also had to come up with tiles to make the world of Dragon Quest. Between the fields, towns, and castle interior, they were already using 32 tiles, but they only needed 8 tiles for dungeon interior. They worked tirelessly over Christmas Eve and even New Year's and came up with tiles for the ocean, the castle, the deserts, the dungeon, and in total there were 32 different designs. But one stood more important than the rest: the bridge. You see, the bridge had a pretty deep meaning. Not only did the bridge connect the world of Dragon Quest, but it was also used to split the map into different areas where the different groups of monsters would appear. Every time you would cross a bridge into a new area, you would encounter newer, stronger monsters. This would indicate to the player that if they were able to defeat the monsters where they currently were, maybe it was time to cross this bridge into the new land and face off against the challenges that await ahead. They also wanted to spruce up the towns. Inside the towns there were trees, grass, inns built with bricks, and townspeople, but they wanted to add more color, so they made sure to add some water in some of the towns to spruce them up a little. Nakamura also expressed his frustration of having to read an entire manual in order to understand how to play the game. So for Dragon Quest, they wanted to design it so the player wouldn't need to read a manual at all. They wanted to ensure that players will learn the rules of the game naturally just by playing. And that is how we ended up with that first room in Dragon Quest, where you start off in the throne room, you learn your surroundings, and you learn how to interact with them all in that single first room of the game. They also had to brainstorm monster ideas like slimes, chimera, bee-werewolves, gold golems, and drakis. When asked what the gold golem was, Yuji Horii said, "You don't get much EXP if you defeat them, but they'll reward you with a lot of gold, which is a special bonus." Nobody knew what the golem or even gold golem should look like, but they knew it was in good hands with Akira Toriyama. They also initially wanted to have a party in Dragon Quest I because they figured the battles would definitely be more interesting if there were party dynamics. But they knew that making new players to the genre manage multiple party members would be way too harsh and put people off of the game. So they decided to stick with 1v1 battles and just a single character in the party. It was shortly after this that Yuji Horii and Nakamura had finally met Koichi Sugiyama. Initially, they were very skeptical of him working on Dragon Quest. They knew he composed projects for TV and anime, but they strongly felt that someone who didn't get video games just wouldn't be able to make a very good soundtrack for their game. After meeting up with him, they found that Sugiyama was as obsessed with video games as they were, and from then on knew he was the right pick for the job. Sugiyama went on to say, "I think game music is the complete opposite from making a hit song. Hit songs have to make an impact right from the beginning, but as a trade-off, they're tiring to listen to for months on end. In fact, they're almost designed that way. But see, video game music is different. You listen to it for long periods of time, so the music can be a little plain so long as you don't get tired of it. So rather than being flashy right away, it has to be music that's easy to listen to. Those are the fundamentals." After hearing Sugiyama's take on video game music, they knew that this was the perfect man for the job, and said video game music is like classical music, one that people will listen to for decades, even centuries. It was back to game design for Yuji Horii and Nakamura. Yuji Horii continued designing maps for things like Tentacle Castle and towns, as well as the world map. He then had to figure out character placement and dialogue. Character placement wasn't as simple as it initially seemed, because Yuji Horii wanted to place characters in specific places to let the player know that you could actually reach those areas. For example, the people placed on the outskirts of Rimuldar show that it's possible to walk around the town of Rimuldar and eventually find the magic key salesman. He also had to make sure that the characters had enough dialogue to give the player goals and direction on where to go next. And at the end of January of 1986, Enix postponed the originally scheduled February release date to May. Meanwhile, they had finally gotten the character and monster designs back from Akira Toriyama and absolutely loved them. Whilst this was going on, Sugiyama was also hard at work designing the music for the game. He wanted the opening theme to make some sort of an impact. He wanted to make sure the passion in the hearts of the developers was reflected in this song. So we opened the game with a large fanfare of medieval European music like trumpets and horns. The developers immediately fell in love with it, as well as the Tentacle Castle theme, where Sugiyama envisioned a medieval European band playing at a ball. Sugiyama came to Chunsoft every week to check the music, and made alterations as necessary. This is when the developers and Sugiyama came up with the idea of the music changing as the player got deeper into certain dungeons. They wanted to create some sort of an ominous sound, and in order to do so, they wanted to make the music quieter and deeper as you got deeper into the dungeon. Sugiyama also thought it would enhance the experience if they slowed down the tempo, giving the player a feeling of descending. The lower you descend, the quieter and slower the music. And it really worked. This is something that I didn't even notice when I was playing the games, but after hearing them mention it here, it's very subliminally impactful on the player. After all this, version 1 of the game was completed, and it was time to bug check and make sure the game worked properly. This was where they had to figure out the balancing in terms of how much EXP you needed to level up, and how much EXP certain monsters would even give out. They then decided that it would be best to make the player gain levels quicker at the start of the game to get them more excited and realize how fun it is to level up, so that later on in the game, when the gaps between levels was larger, they knew it would still be worth it to push on. So instead of gaining your first level at 20 EXP, they decided to change it and drop it down to 7 EXP instead. In hindsight, this was a wise decision, and it turned out to be spot on. The fun of leveling up was one of the key charms of Dragon Quest. They also had to pick apart the game in order to improve it to what it ended up becoming at release. Things like the windows just being too small when they would pop up made them feel like players might miss them, so they made sure to increase their size and overlap them over previous windows. They always wanted to keep in mind that these games were made for regular people, which was one of the reasons why Dragon Quest became as popular as it did. Another concern they began to have was with the text-based battle system. They wanted the players to feel like they were dealing and taking damage, and they figured that maybe with it just being text-based, this wouldn't be enough to capture the player's attention. Thankfully, Nakamura came up with the idea that the screen would shake when the player took damage, and they would play sound effects when dealing and receiving damage as well, giving the game its engrossing, distinct feel. After playtesting it, they also came up with the idea that if the character were to die, they would just lose half their gold and keep all their experience points in progress, so that even if you lose, you can just keep playing until you eventually win. The release date was just around the corner, and the game was in the last stages of development in the spring of 1986. But this is when they started to feel like the last part of the game just felt a bit dull. They still had some changes that they really wanted to make to the game. They ended up letting staff members who didn't normally play video games test out the game, and they kept getting defeated, which made them realize they needed to tweak some of the damage values and defense values of the armor as well. Eventually, they brought in kids to playtest the game, and they found that they were all dying at the very start. This is because originally the game started you outside in between Tentacle Castle and Breckenary. After seeing these kids lose constantly before being able to figure out what to do, they remembered that they wanted to make a game where you didn't need to read a manual, and this is where they came up with the player starting in the throne room of the castle and the locked doors and treasure chests, so that you could learn all the commands of the game and know what you're doing before leaving the opening room. They wanted to trap the player in this room until they could figure out what to do, and with a limited amount of commands, it didn't take long for players to learn how to play the game. It also gave a better start to the game because the king would tell you the situation you were in and the journey that you were about to begin. They also realized that they wanted to add more depth and variety to the battles in the later parts of the game, and begged Cheetah to delay the game once more. Thankfully, Cheetah was willing to put his career on the line to let these guys develop the game that they knew would be the best game ever made. He bought them one more week to reprogram the end of the game. The developers knew they had only a week to fix what they wanted to fix and got to work immediately. They worked every single day, even at all hours at night, playing the game over and over again, trying out different scenarios. They were almost completely finished the game and out of time when they realized that there was a bug where there was a 1 in 16 chance that the rainbow bridge wouldn't appear even if you had the rainbow drop. So Nakamura had to quickly go in and fix this bug before the release date. Then finally, the game was complete. They were able to play all the way through it to the end and see the ending screen on the Famicom itself. Dragon Quest was released in Japan on May 27th, 1986. This manga was written in 1990, just before the release of Dragon Quest IV. A game that, in my opinion, would blow the Erdrick trilogy, which started here with Dragon Quest I, completely out of the water. Definitely check out this manga yourself if you want to get into more details. I made sure to just focus on the actual development of the game, but there's definitely some fun little details on the developers and some of the games that they like to play in here as well. I wanted to make this video not only to share with you the development process of Dragon Quest I, a game that is so important to me and so incredibly important to the JRPG genre in and of itself, but I also wanted to make this as thanks to the developers, to Yuji Horii, to Nakamura, to Koichi Sugiyama, and of course to Akira Toriyama as well. Thank you for making a game that changed my life forever. A game that would kickstart the greatest JRPG series of all time. If not for them, the JRPG genre probably wouldn't exist the way it is today. If not for them, we wouldn't even have series like Final Fantasy, Breath of Fire, and Expedition 33. These developers took principles from different genres and different types of RPGs and combined them and made them simple so that anyone could play and enjoy them. And that's really what makes Dragon Quest what it is. It's a bunch of stories that come together and tell a bigger story. A story about perseverance through difficulty, a story about exploring a brand new world, and a story about protecting the people you love and care about. But that same story is influenced by the same things in the developers' lives. Let me know down in the comments if there's anything you learned in this video that you didn't know before about the development of Dragon Quest I. Let me know your thoughts on Dragon Quest I and its importance, and let me know what drew you into this fantastic series. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you did, please remember to like, subscribe, turn notifications to all so you don't miss the next video. Again, if you're on mobile, please hype the video. It helps out so much. And I will see you guys in the next one.